With the news that sgares, one of the great North American in-game leaders in CSGO history, is stepping down, I thought I'd just let you know about Alpha Draft, a great North American fantasy esports company who's stepping up their game to provide excellent fantasy esports services. In games such as CSGO, they have numerous online leagues and LANs there, so description box below has a link in it if you want to click and play there. If not, that's the end of the commercial part. So seangares has stepped down from Cloud9 as the in-game leader and an active player, and at the moment we have no clue as to what he's going to do next in his career. Now in the past, he had voiced, I think he'd hinted at it publicly, and I know he'd said privately to people, including me, that he had the notion of retiring earlier on in 2015, and that possibly at the time with a view to maybe even being the coach if he thought it was necessary, that would help the team evolve, or just retiring outright. Now as a player, for people who didn't follow CS 1.6, he was a 1.6 player in the latter years. We're talking like 2010 to 2012 was when he was like sort of like an invite level player, but he wasn't particularly significant. Like there was no notable aspects to his career in 1.6 except at the very end, and even then very limited in terms of domestic aspect, because he was just playing usually in the teams that would finish like second or third in sort of like 2011, 2010 sort of era. No, more like 2010 actually for that. The teams who would finish second or third playing with guys like Paulie and Steno at ESEA lands. And at the time, ESEA lands were NA only. No one from Europe attended them. So it was essentially just like the Evil Geniuses type top level teams. And then Complexity around that era. And then he was in like the third or fourth best teams, usually battling for their like a decent finish. And occasionally they had upsets, like when they made their final one time. But then in 2011, he hooked up with Semphis and Swag, and he was in their teams they had, which were like a mixture of Canadian and American players. They were full gaming, back to back. They were doing well in the SEA lands at the time. That was when like Evil Genius had lost Lurpus, and they'd kind of broken up as a top team, so it was quite open at these ESEA lands. But again, ESEA lands weren't top elite level international competition. Then eventually they even got Nothing involved in the mix, so they already had they already had four of the players that would eventually become Complexity there: Swag, Semphis, seangares, and Nothing at one point in time. That was like the very end of 1.6, we're talking 2012 there, where they brought Nothing in. Then in early CSGO, he was involved quite early on actually. He was in this team that was Area 51, and he was playing with Hiko, he was playing with Semphis, and he was playing with Dazed, later on the in-game leader of iBuyPower. And at this time, I believe seangares was actually the in-game leader of this team, and they qualified for ESWC, which was one of the first reasonably big events in late 2012 in early CSGO history. CSGO really only got started going competitively about August of 2012 onwards. And they went to this LAN and they did very well actually. They finished in third place behind NIP and Very Games. They beat, I think it was N Faculty, the Germans, in the third place game, so they did pretty well there. And that was again with seangares leading, and actually Dazed was kind of like an individual start at the point in time. He was like an MVP candidate for that tournament. But at the beginning of the year, despite that good result, at the very beginning of 2013, the first whole year of CSGO, he actually initially stepped back, and I don't know if it was like he was retiring or what, but he just stepped back and stopped playing for a little while. And instead, in that lineup, which had then become like 4-0, they'd left Area 51 and would eventually become Quantic, they brought in Frost, who was an AWPer. And actually, that was kind of the move they needed to go to the next level, because then they had a couple of really good results in like the April of that year. And that was like, at the time, the best NA team we'd had. And he'd like stepped back from that point in time. And Frost was especially key in their ESEA, I think it was season 13 run, where they made it to the final. Did they make it to the final? Yeah, they did. So beyond that, he's someone where he only came back really into like any kind of relevancy around like May of that year, where the Quantic team, first of all, they tried to kick out, I think they initially wanted to kick Semphis, and then Hiko left, and the whole team kind of fractured, and then Dazed stepped back, and so eventually the Quantic name became available because it stopped sponsoring that team. And so this new Quantic team comes along, which seangares is a part of, which basically becomes Complexity, and then a year later or so Cloud9. And so that's where the kind of lifespan of seangares getting back involved in the top level of CSGO was. And to this point in time, yeah, as an in-game leader, we still just know him as only an NA in-game leader. We know he's like decent, but we don't know that he's that great. And as a 1.6 player, he was just an okay player, average level invite type player, nothing special, just a decent player. But obviously an in-game leader, as an in-game leader, is how we primarily think of seangares now. And that's the thing, that it's his strength in terms of as a player. It's the impact he's been able to have on his teams and his scene in general. As an in-game leader, his primary strengths: he's good at reading the game, like seeing what's going on. And I have to say, there's different types of reading the game. Someone like Gob B is famously good at reading the game, where if you just put him into a match and you have him play a couple of rounds, he'll be able to look and see like, right, I can see that they kind of like they're gambling off on this part of the defense here, and it seems like they're always going to flash this area if you put a guy in. He'll read that sort of information just from the information coming in at him. I've always felt like seangares' reading of the game came more from when he's had the time to study the opponents, which is definitely a strength of his, watching lots of demos, trying to break down the opponent. That leads into his type of reading. His type of reading isn't like the pure just mind reading of what the opponent's doing in visualization. It's more like knowing what their setups are and being able to identify it from the smaller aspects. I always felt like that was one of his strengths. That's why when he doesn't have the time to do the proper research and do all his kind of dossier on players, I always felt like he struggled a little bit when he didn't have the tendencies down to know what he was looking for. So it's a different type of reading in that particular sense. It's less intuitive and it's more kind of like logical and trying to figure out, like, solve a puzzle. Like if you're a Sherlock Holmes type character coming to a crime scene and you're looking for what the little clues are that might lead to something. Now, that is the strength of his, breaking down opponents. If he has time to go through all the demos, if he's played this team a couple of times and he knows some of the things that are going on there, he's one of the best in terms of in-game leaders at coming up with anti-strats, at figuring out, here's what they're going to do at this point in time, and so here's like a hard counter or like a direct attack or something that we're going to do that'll limit that to some degree, if not exploit it directly. Or we can use it as a distraction technique. He's very good at that. I mean, the most famous example is this classic example at the first ever major in CSGO, which was DreamHack Winter 2013. Now, what people forget is they always remember the second part of this story. And the second part of the story is where the anti-stratting fails, and it shows that anti-stratting can be a bad idea, and it makes them look stupid, and seangares looks like an idiot. But you have to realize it's the both sides of it, because the way it worked, here's what people forget, is that first and foremost, in the quarterfinals of that tournament, Cloud9 wasn't even... they were Cloud9 at the Complexity. Complexity wasn't even supposed to go past the quarterfinals. In the quarterfinals, they played Astana Dragons, this CIS super team with Markelov and Dosia, Kucha, all these, like, at the time, very good players, really good aimers. And when they had this particular lineup, they were the third best team in the world. They'd beaten NiP in a bunch of series. They'd placed in top 2, top 3 of big lands. So this was supposed to be the team that would then knock Cloud Complexity out, and they'd be out in the round of 8. But what happened was, this was a game where you could tell he'd studied the games of the Astana Dragons players, who played in a fairly predictable manner because they were just aim stars. They didn't try to play so cerebrally, and they had very limited strats that would just try and run a couple of. And he really helped shut them down. And part of the reason that his team, Complexity, were able to win in 3 games is because he really understood where the players were going to be and what their tendencies were and how to exploit that. And so actually, I think in terms of teams, I think the Astana Dragons team was much better. But as an actual overall unit, when they had this strategy, when they had the time to plan, and when they had this approach that seangares brought, that's why they were able to beat them. I mean, there was even I remember there was actually a moment in the game where they completely caught Dosia out and they like Molotoved him off, and I think he just died in the fire because they just knew the position he was in. They didn't even have to peek him. They just could like put it right onto that spot, and then they just mind gamed him completely. You can see how, I remember watching the game from behind the teams, see how frustrated the Astana Dragons players were, because it would seem like bullshit to them. Like, how are they knowing where we are? Like, how are they putting flashes in right where I'm sitting here? And you could see he'd done his homework there. The problem was that approach worked, so he moved on to the semi-finals. And in the semi-finals, he was playing Fnatic. And this was the Fnatic that was JW, Flusher, Pronax, but they had Schneider and Devilwalk back there. It's the one that would win the major. And famously, this is where the anti-stratting completely fell apart, because in this instance he tried to anti-strat again, but listen, he couldn't have known this, okay? But Pronax had only been in Fnatic for something like 2 weeks at that point in time. And what people didn't know about Pronax is that Pronax's whole T-style, and to some degree this has always been the case, was predicated on setting up a base on T-side, then just reading initially what's happening. He's someone who's quite good at making the mid-round call, so he can read a scene, and then just changing what's going to happen as needs be within the middle of the round. Likewise on CT, calling like a simple rotation, maybe sometimes gambling ahead of time. That's why Fnatic sort of revolutionized that holding banana information style based approach to the game. This is one of the tournaments where they really showcased it. Now the problem with that approach is that when seangares came and he'd watched all their demos of what they were doing and he'd got all this stuff figured out, he tried to hard counter all the stuff that he thought Fnatic would do. And so all Fnatic did is they just didn't do any of that stuff, and they would purposely use the preconception of what seangares thought they would do to fuck them over and to do something that so that the hard counter wouldn't work. And not only that, it would utterly fail because they'd have like a flank going, or they'd like draw them into an area where they wanted them to go. And unfortunately, that's why they got completely wrecked in this series, 2-0 by like convincing scores by Fnatic. I think it was like 16-8 or 16-7 on both maps, and it was a really embarrassing loss. But that just shows you the extremes of the anti-strike aspect, and you have to know your opponent as well, which he couldn't really do at that point in time. Pronax hadn't been a prominent name in European Counter-Strike Global Offensive, beyond just like the Swedish scene and some like okay level tournaments. He wasn't thought of as a great leader at the time, so you couldn't have known that that very unique aspect to that leader would like throw off your approach, which had been working to this point in time. You'd beaten Very Games, the best team in the world in the group stage. You'd beaten Astana Dragons. Now you come up in theory against an easier team, a less experienced team, and you'd think that this approach would work, but unfortunately it didn't. Now, that also shows this anti-stratting approach and how much that elevated seangares' game is in his team's games. If you go and look at this year when they had the run of the 3 finals, where they made it to the final of ESL, ESEA Pro League, they made it to the final of ESWC, and they made it to the final of the Faceit season, I think it was Stage 2 it was called, offline finals that were at GMAC Valencia. Now, the ESL ESEA one was by far the best performance from Cloud9. They really came close to beating Fnatic, the legendary greatest team of all time, in a best of 5, and they were so close on 2 maps to getting it and winning the series. They did very, very well in this series. Incredible performance against one of the great teams. That was when seangares had a night to prepare for that. He played the semi-final one day, the next day it was the final. He had time to prepare, had time to think about it, time to watch demos. The other 2 finals, the SWC one where they got wrecked in the first map, then they had 2 16-14s that they lost on the next 2. In fact, was that the way around it was? Well, obviously they won 16-14, the second one, and then they lost the third one, yeah, against Na'Vi in the ESWC final. And then the Faceit final was where they played against TSM, and ultimately TSM got busy all over him and wrecked him. Those 2 were where they had to play the semi-final the same day as the final, and so with that lack of prep time and lack of time to reflect, kind of visualize what you could do against an opponent and try and anticipate what he'll do, their teams were much weaker, and they had to essentially just play off basic stuff they had and then trying to outskill the opponent, which didn't really work as well. And so the better performance was clearly when they had this prep time, and I think you've seen that in the history of his team. The times they get upset when they're playing against some of these teams are the teams that they're ones you might not be able to necessarily predict what they're going to do, like a Kingwin type team that beat them at the major, where you may not have all the data on that because they're always changing players, they're changing in-game leader, they're changing what style they're playing. There's going to be less data for him to draw a picture of what the team's like and then design the approach to how to attack them in that particular sense. He's also, in terms of as an in-game leader, as a tactician, yes, he's good. And he's good at like reading the game in a certain sense. He's good at designing strats. He's quite a dedicated player. These are all great qualities. In terms of the other aspects of being a leader, though, beyond just like the in-game aspect of like, here's a tactic, the actual leading aspect, he had his issues with throughout his time. He's never been that forceful an in-game leader. And as a result, he's never been someone who really corralled certain players, famously nothing throughout his career, and made him like, you have to play this role, we need you to do this, it's got to be this way. He would kind of like debate with them or talk with them or try and reason with them, but if they weren't going to do it, to some degree, it wasn't going to happen for him. And this aspect of not being such a great motivating personal leader in that sense is kind of one of the issues, I think, because you can see he had his issues throughout his career, dealing with Semphis, who kind of like would short circuit the strat if he wanted to and do what he wanted to do, or get frustrated, and nothing, didn't want to play certain roles or would want to switch roles up or wouldn't know the tactic, even still in 2015 at times. I actually feel like what changed that around for seangares is he is someone who should, that's not his personality type. He should just be set as the tactician and running that. So what they needed was someone essentially to be like an enforcer, to keep what he's saying is what's going to go. You need someone to enforce the law, as it were. And that was Freakazoid. When Freakazoid joined, I feel like that's the addition. This is my speculation as to what improved that aspect of Cloud9. Because now you had someone where they had like that forceful personality, but also they've bought into the system of seangares, and they know that if we can do what this guy says, we're going to have a better chance and the unit's going to operate better. And so that took away a lot of the issues that they'd had in the past in those particular instances. Suddenly you saw Shroud started to get overall better level, I think, as part of this group unit, whereas that's another thing with Shroud. They'd had Shroud, remember, since like the summer of 2014, but he'd had like some moments of good, some flashes of brilliance, but then he'd had months where it was kind of average. And so again, a forceful leader would have gotten hold of that player and been like, listen, you've got to dedicate yourself. You can't just be fucking around streaming all the time and all this sort of stuff. It's got to be, you got to want to succeed. That's to be the number one goal. It seemed like he was someone, okay, in as much as he's not forceful, it's like he was willing to let people like, okay, unless we all agree to do this, people can do their own thing and we'll just kind of like meet in the middle somewhere and try and compromise a bit. And the issue was you needed someone to run their team, as I was kind of mentioning, which is what I think they got eventually. Likewise, when Skadoodle first got there, if you remember when he initially arrived, they actually had some issues at those first lands. And that's because they didn't initially know how to use seangares, because when Skadoodle had played with Daze was a guy who was a dictator player who was going to go, right, you're going to go here and do it this way, I'm going to set you up for this, and it's all going to be on your back. Again, with Skadoodle, they were just putting him in positions. It was kind of like, okay, do your thing, like, okay, is everything going okay? But that's not such a communicative player, at least at the time. It's not a player who understands necessarily his role within the bigger context. You have to, to some degree, minor level, micro him a little bit. It's also someone where I have to say for seangares' whole career, yes, in the latter days, he had this sick run this summer where he did get a lot out of the team. In the early days, late 2013, early 2014, he had a good run with the team. But there were times, especially the last half or so of 2014, minus that major, where you look at the team and they couldn't really get the best out of what they had. There were too many compromises. There was too much. It was too mixed up as to what type of team we're going to be. Are we going to be a team that plays this like janky kind of like scrimmy style of play and tries to upset people and play on weird maps? Or are we going to be like a default team who tries to be one of the best and play the basics, but then we're probably not going to be as skilled as the top Europeans? They were always caught between these two positions and they can never quite figure it out. That's why at one point in time in late 2014 they actually switched off from seangares becoming just a player and Senfis becoming the in-game leader and going purely to that scrimmy style, which allowed them to beat Virtus Pro on cash a couple of times, but they never made it out of the groups at the tournament. So they had their issues even figuring out their identity in that particular sense. It's also got to be said that he's someone where, overall, you can't really argue with his record of success. It is very good. He's the only NA in-game leader to reach the top 4 or even the top 8 of a major in CSGO. He reached the top 4 of DreamHack Winter 2013. He's made the top 8 a couple of times after that. Katowice 2014, ESL 1 Cologne 2014. He actually won a map off the almost unbeatable. They had been beaten at that point in time, but they were still incredibly dominant. NIP in like the late summer of 2013, I think it was, ESEA season 14. They won a map off them in the final, who were incredible at the time. They finished top 4, like I said, DreamHack Winter. They had the top 8s at those majors, particularly the ESL 1 Cologne of 2014. That was the one where they got beaten by NIP, where if anything, NIP was very, very fluky and had like a miracle game on cobblestone. Otherwise, I think it would have been complexity. Minimum, they would have been in the semis, but I think they could have beaten that LDLC. That would have been a very close game, and they might have been in the final of a major, which would be, it's still unthinkable for an NA team, but they could have done it. It really could have happened that time. Then you had, but the NIP Magic came in. Then you had, in 2015, obviously, this run of 3 finals in a row. 3 international finals. Admittedly, the ESWC one isn't as impressive because there was no TSM, there was no Fnatic. But you go back to the other 2 tournaments, and they both have TSM and Fnatic in. So ESL, ESEA Pro League, yes, you got some help from the upsets in the other group where you got to play CLG in the semis, but you got to that point in time by being Envious once, and then in a best of 3, so that's sick. Yeah, great stuff. Then you get to the final, you play Fnatic really close, excellent performance, one of the best from an NA team of all time. Probably the best, actually. Then you look and you have the ESWC one. This was the one where they beat Envious again. Admittedly, that Envious was like literally dead. Like they already knew they were broken up, but whatever. You make it to the final. Hey, you still win a map off Na'Vi. That was pretty sick. Na'Vi were in fine form at the time. Then you go to the Face It one. Okay, yes, the final, they get stomped. That's not as great. But they managed to beat the all-time great team, Fnatic, in a 2-0 in a best of 3 semi-final. That's unreal stuff. So yeah, great accomplishments. You can't argue with the record. Obviously, he's accomplished very good things as an in-game leader and had a great effect on his team and his scene in terms of they're lacking good in-game leaders there. But I wanted to kind of present like a balanced view of how I see some of the strengths, but how they balance out with some of the other aspects. I also want to just address this topic because there's this whole almost like, I don't want to say a myth because it's not like it's true or false or whatever, but the people have always tried to sell this hype that, you know, if seangares didn't want to be an in-game leader, he could be a sick individual skilled player. Like I've seen him in a scrim do this, or in a pug he did this, or look at this mixed tournament where he played and look how great he was. Let's be absolutely real here. He's not a great individually skilled player. In fact, even amongst in-game leaders, he's one of the worst when you think of big names for in-game leaders. So I actually went and looked up these stats. So I got a bunch of players who you think of as his type of in-game leader, the one that's not supposed to frag that much, that just plays in the game and it's more known for the tactical brain, so we let them off the fragging. So you've got GodB, seangares, Existence, Pronax, Zeus, and Dazed. I thought of all those ones, okay? Played as in-game leaders the majority of their career in CSGO. If we look at just the overall stats, now obviously these stats have no context to them, but the overall stats for their career on LAN, we looked up kill to death ratio and kills in a round ratio. If we rank them from the lowest to the highest, the only person who's lower than seangares for those 2 stats is GodB, and he's the same for kill to death ratio, but slightly lower, 0.01 on kill to round ratio. seangares is like 0.83 kill to death and 0.57 kill to round. Then after that, Existence, who people think, hey, shit, he's not even a skilled player at all. He's much higher. He's 0.92 for kill to death So he's high already. Prolax is 0.93. Zeus is 0.97 on kill to death, and Dazed is 1.13 K to D. Now, admittedly, Dazed didn't always go as deep into it, so he's had a number of big runs, and he's had quite a long career himself. So you can see someone like Dazed is exactly what people are trying to hype seangares as in this respect. He legit could be like a really good individual player if he wasn't the in-game leader, but he's someone whose mind wanted to be the in-game leader because of his personality. Now, seangares doesn't need to be the in-game leader. I've always said this. I would pick him as one of my first people to make an NA team round, but I'd put all these really skilled people who fit all the other roles. Then I'd have him as the in-game leader, and he wouldn't need to frag much. I want his brain to be what's impacting the game, and he's going to use his skills just to make the tactic work, and that's where he's going to shine and where he's going to have his strengths, and he's not going to have any pressure to frag. So people overrated that. Just like, for example, there was a period in late 2014 where, because Cloud9 until Skadoodle came along, always lacked for a really good dedicated AWPer. He started just AWPing. He always used to AWP like tactically. I always say there's a type of utility AWP. It's the type Fifth Laren used to use, where you just use it to lock off one angle, or use it to scout for information, or use it to just hold a certain area of the map. So it's like, if they cross here, then I have the information that they're on that side of the map if they don't. So for a tactician, it can be useful occasionally to use this type of AWP. But that was his best type of AWP. He was never some super sick AWP. I don't care if someone links to like an odd clip here. It's just the facts don't bear it out if you've watched his whole career AWPing. And in late 2014, he was just getting bodied trying to do like 1v1s against Skadoodle and a bunch of other international AWPers. So he was a decent AWPer, but it wasn't with the consistency where you could ever be considered like a dedicated sniper who was good on an international level. It was just decent for NA, and they didn't have that many AWPers at the time, and he's using it in a tactical way. So again, the hype has gotten a bit overblown by certain people in that. I think most of the community realizes he's not that great in those two areas, but I just wanted to address that. So what is next for seangares at this point? Now, obviously, he said on his stream he doesn't know, but we can speculate. Okay, so will he become a coach? Now, here's what's interesting. From the conversation that happened in the past, obviously, we're talking like 4 or 5 months, if not 6 months ago. The conversation before was like, maybe I'll become the coach. In fact, I think early 2015, he told me he's considering, if it's for the better of the team, maybe I should become a coach. And the impetus there was I would become a coach, but I'd become the coach of Cloud9, so I'd still give them the input. And nowadays, obviously, you could stand behind them. That's obviously, I think, would be a good approach. I don't know that it's certain to work, as I mentioned in my previous video. I'll link it there, the one that's about, assuming I even remember, the one that's about making your coach the person who was your in-game leader, the other way around. In that scenario, I think it would be better than nothing, but it's not certain it would work. And also, in this case, it sounds like, from the tone of it, like actually, it's sounding to me, if I had to bet my money, I don't think that's going to happen. It sounds like he's not going to stay in Cloud9 in this sort of a capacity. If he did it sounds like he might go elsewhere. Obviously, going to the analysis desk should be a shoo-in because he's done the analysis desk before, starting with like ESL1 Katowice 2014. He's been on a bunch of the ESL analysis desks. He always gives good info. In fact, he even did the grand final of a tournament. So someone that always had good info in that particular regard. I think he did the final of ESL1 Cologne 2014, where it was the NIP versus Fnatic one. Always gives good info, breaks down the game well, has good insights on the players. So I think that would be a shoo-in to do analysis desk and commentary. I'd love to see him there, have some banter going. Or, here's the thing people haven't thought of. What if he goes elsewhere? What if he decides I need a new challenge in my life? So I'm going to go to, you know what? If you want to be a coach, I would say obvious ones. I mean, obviously, no one really wants to go to NIP because of the whole situation there. But if teams like this had the same lineup, let's say these lineups that exist now stayed for 2016, and a number of them won't. The two teams I would say should pay mad money to try and get someone like seangares on their side as a coach would be NIP and G2, Gamers 2. If these teams could get someone like seangares with the skilled players they have, obviously more skilled in terms of the G2 than NIP at the moment, I think he could kind of fix some of the issues they have to make them more effective teams and give them the insights on what the opponent's going to do, give them the analysis and the scouting report that would be really useful for some of these very skilled individual players. I think that would be an obvious one where if I was those orgs, I'd go mad and start paying out the long paper to get someone like seangares on my team because he could be a great coach in that respect. You also have to ask what's next for Cloud9 in this respect. I mean, obviously the option is if we can get seangares as a coach, that'd be great. Sounds like that's not going to happen though. So if they're not going to have him there whatsoever, suddenly they've got this massive yawning chasm, gap, vacuum where he used to be as an in-game leader and thinker within the game. And so losing that's going to be really bad for them. I don't know what they do at this point in time because who's going to be the in-game leader? What, someone from the current lineup? I don't think that'll be very good. If they make nothing the in-game leader, he might be okay at certain points of the game. He's not going to be close to the same sort of mind as seangares was. And famously, Nothing's one of the guys who would be like, what was the strat again? And he's going to be the in-game leader. That doesn't work for me. So now you need an in-game leader. And none of the names people are suggesting to replace seangares are in-game leaders. So I see real issues there for Cloud9. Now, in terms of the players they might get, well, that whole thing of like, it's a rumoured they might get right. No. Here's the thing, okay. Obviously, I can't speak as a fact because I wasn't directly involved with like paperwork. But based on the information I am aware of, it seems almost certain that would have happened. Get right, would have been in Cloud9, at least on a trial basis, already within 2015. It didn't happen because of the NIP organization wanted to keep him contracted for certain events, and as a result, the deal got kind of queered and he didn't end up going. It would have happened already, and seangares would have stepped out and Get right would have tried out as the in-game, not in-game leader, but as a player within the team. And who knows, maybe they wanted him to be the in-game leader. He's flirted with doing it in NIP before. I still think that might be an interesting move. I think better for Get Right in terms of getting fans. I don't know how great they'd be as a team, but he's obviously a great player, so he could definitely do work. The problem there I see is Get Right's a very passive player. They've already got almost too many passive players in a sense in Cloud9. So I'd rather a more aggressive player. There's this rumour, I mean, again, a rumour, but it sounds like they were thinking about it, where they were going to get Stewie2K, this guy who's just a pog star in NA. Now, the problem there is people always complain that he's just an onliner, that he just wrecks people because he plays stupidly online and that he's got bad attitude, which is, by the way, the typical things people tend to label at people who haven't been land proven in that sense. So don't put too much into that. But these also aren't just like haters who were saying this among pro players. Some of the ones who were saying it seem quite reasonable. So I think there's issues there. That would be a more aggressive player to potentially put in. But I don't know how that would work. He doesn't have any actual competitive experience. That's a big problem for you right there. So there are certain issues there. I don't know who they replace it, because you don't necessarily just want to go the skill route, because you need the in-game leader. So I think Cloud9 have got some really difficult choices to make over the next sort of 3 months. And I think they're going to be in trouble without seangares for a while to come now. I would be surprised at the moment how things sit if they ever accomplish what they accomplished with that run of finals again. Because it seems like this is a key piece you couldn't take out. Yeah, skill-wise, he wasn't going to light the world up and do anything in the game, but his impact in terms of how he was able to utilize the skilled players he had, Skadoodle, Shroud, Freakazoid, this was a big aspect of what made Cloud9 very good. And he wasn't the engine of the team that was like Skadoodle and these sorts of players, but he was the one driving it in that particular sense, in terms of the tactics and where to go, etc. I guess the one spiritually driving the team was Freakazoid, but I think you can see some of the dynamics of the team there. So yeah, thanks to Alpha Draft for the Mad Skrilla.